"We have nowhere to go, my children," old Arthur whispered, his voice choked by the biting wind that swept through the ruins of Blackwood Castle. His grandchildren, small and hungry, shivered beneath their rags, their wide eyes fixed on the dancing shadows of the damp walls. With every creak of old wood, every icy howl that seemed to echo the desolation itself, fear chilled the old man's spine. He knew that here, in this forgotten place, feared as cursed, he needed to find the strength to protect them. And what he discovered while trying to seal a breach in the old wall would forever change that family's destiny, revealing a secret forgotten for centuries. Arthur felt the roughness of the cold stone beneath his fingers as the loose mortar gave way, revealing not just the darkness of the void behind the wall, but a carefully hidden space. His heart, already so battered by pain and weariness, leaped. It wasn't just a crack for the wind, but a niche, a secret the stones had kept for centuries. With trembling hands, he fumbled in the gloom, his wrinkled fingers brushing against the surface of something that felt like dried leather. He pulled it out carefully, and what emerged was a small volume, an ancient diary, and just beneath it, a rolled parchment, yellowed by time. His grandchildren, João and Pedro, who until then had been watching their grandfather with a mix of curiosity and exhaustion, widened their eyes slightly. João, the elder, at 7 years old, murmured, "What is it, Grandpa?" Pedro, just 5, simply snuggled closer, the cold seeming to penetrate his bones. For an instant, Arthur forgot the wind and the hunger. That unexpected find brought a spark of something he hadn't felt in a long time: possibility. He held the diary and the map close to his chest, as if they were precious treasures, which in a way they were. The faint light, filtering through a high slit in the castle, barely reached the corner where they sat. But Arthur could feel the texture of the ancient paper, the smell of mold and history. "I don't know, my little ones," he replied, his voice hoarser than usual, but with a tone of wonder that surprised even himself. It looks like a book and a map." Hunger, however, was a relentless reality. The boys' stomachs rumbled, a sound Arthur knew all too well. He looked at their pale faces, their cracked lips and sunken eyes. The discovery was important, yes, but the priority was warmth and food. With a heavy sigh, he tucked the findings inside his worn coat, promising himself he would examine them once the boys were safer and, if possible, fed. Night was approaching, and with it the cold intensified. Arthur needed to close that breach, not only to hide the compartment, but to protect his grandchildren from the biting wind. He pushed the loose stones back into place, using a piece of wood as a lever. Every movement was an effort, every muscle ached, but the image of the boys' faces gave him strength. As he worked, his mind buzzed. A diary, a map. What could they reveal? Would it just be the story of some ancient inhabitant or something more? The premise of a cursed castle had always frightened him, but curiosity and hope were beginning to supplant fear. He thought of his beloved wife, Ilara, whose smile was still a vivid and painful memory. She had always believed in signs, in a greater purpose. Could this be one of them? "Grandpa, I'm cold," Pedro whimpered, tugging at Arthur's sleeve. The old man turned, kneeling with difficulty. He embraced both boys with what strength he had left, trying to impart some of his own warmth. "Hold on, my loves. Grandpa will find a way. We always find a way." His eyes scanned the decrepit surroundings, searching for anything that could serve as shelter, any sliver of light amidst the darkness that seemed to swallow them. That diary, that map, were now his only promise, a thin thread of hope in a sea of despair. He needed to read them, and he needed to do it soon. His grandchildren's lives depended on it. Arthur held the boys close, feeling their small bodies tremble with cold and exhaustion. The promise to find a way sounded hollow even to his own ears, But he needed to believe in it, and more importantly, he needed João and Pedro to believe in it too. He rose with a muffled groan, his bones creaking in protest. The wind howled through the newly sealed cracks, and the darkness of night was already swallowing the last remnants of light. It wasn't safe to stay there, exposed. "Come, my little ones," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Let's find a more sheltered place to spend the night. Grandpa found something that might help us, but we need a little more light and warmth to understand it." He knew that hunger and cold were priorities, but the hope the diary and map had ignited was a different kind of warmth, one that might perhaps sustain the soul. With an arm around each grandchild, Arthur began to explore the castle ruins. Every step was cautious, the ground uneven and covered in debris. Shadows danced, creating ghostly shapes that tested his courage and the little energy he had left. João, the elder, tried to be strong, but his eyes blinked with sleep and fear. Pedro, his head nestled against his grandfather's side, was already almost asleep, a dead weight that Arthur carried with love and despair. Finally, after what seemed an eternity, they found a small recess in one of the inner towers, a smaller, more intact room with a ruined fireplace and walls that offered some protection from the wind. Part of the ceiling was missing, but it was better than the open field. Arthur gently placed the boys on the dusty floor, pushing aside some smaller stones to create a minimally flat space. "Stay here, my angels," he murmured, taking the diary and map from his coat. "Grandpa will try to light a small fire, just a little warmth." He scoured the ground for dry twigs and pieces of wood, an arduous task in the near-total darkness. His fingers, hardened by a lifetime of labor, fumbled for anything that might burn, with each find a small victory against despair. With immense effort, and using the few sparks he managed to generate with 2 stones and a piece of dry cloth, a trembling flame finally appeared in the fireplace. The warmth was minimal, but the light, oh, the light! It danced on the walls, revealing soot and cobwebs, but also the hungry, hopeful faces of his grandchildren. João's eyes widened. "Fire, Grandpa! How good!" Pedro, waking with the glow, let out a sigh of relief. Arthur sat by the fire, pulling the boys close. The warmth was a blessing, and the light, an invitation to discovery. With hands still slightly trembling, he opened the ancient diary. The pages were of thick parchment, and the ink, though faded in some spots, was still legible. The handwriting was elegant, but the symbols and language, somewhat archaic, demanded concentration. His eyes, already tired from age and lack of sleep, strained to decipher the first lines. The diary was not from an ordinary inhabitant, but seemed to be from one of the castle's founders, someone named Eleanor. Indeed, the first sentences spoke of an ancient promise and a legacy for the true heirs, those whom necessity brought to these forgotten walls. Arthur's heart beat faster. It wasn't a curse, but a promise. He turned the page, anxiety growing. The map, which he had carefully unfolded, showed the castle with strange markings, symbols he didn't immediately understand. But the feeling that they were not alone, that there was a purpose for their arrival there, filled him with renewed strength. Hunger still gnawed at them, and the cold still bit at their extremities, but the flame of hope, fueled by Eleanor's words, burned stronger than ever. The true journey was just beginning, and Arthur felt that for the first time since Ilara's loss, a path was opening before them. His grandchildren watched him, and he knew he could not fail. Arthur leaned closer to the flickering flame, the faint light dancing over the yellowed pages of the diary. His eyes, already blurred by age and weariness, strained to decipher Eleanor's elegant yet intricate handwriting. The words were a tangle of hope and mystery, a voice from the past that seemed to whisper directly into his heart. "A legacy for the true heirs," he murmured, tracing the letters with a wrinkled finger. With each sentence, the castle's history unfolded in a way that defied the dark legends surrounding it. Eleanor saw Blackwood not as a prison, but as a refuge, a vault of secrets and promises. Joanne, feeling the warmth of the fire and his grandfather's comforting presence, rested his head on Arthur's shoulder. "What does it say, Grandpa?" he asked, his voice a sleepy whisper. Pedro was already fast asleep, his pale face illuminated by the embers, dreaming the dreams of a hungry, exhausted boy. Arthur stroked Joanne's hair, a gesture of affection that was, for him, a constant reminder of his promise of protection. "It says this castle isn't cursed, my son. It says it's a place of hope." He continued to read, his mind absorbing every detail. Eleanor, the diary's author, seemed to have been a woman of great vision and heart. She wrote about the need to hide her family's wealth from invaders and greed, not for herself, but for future generations who might find themselves in despair, just as Arthur and his grandchildren were now. With each paragraph, the pain of Ilara's loss, the humiliation of their expulsion, the hunger and the cold seemed to lessen, replaced by a growing sense of purpose. The diary described how the treasure had been divided and hidden in various locations within the castle walls, each protected by riddles and clues that only a pure heart and a persistent mind could unravel. Eleanor spoke of stars that guide, waters that whisper secrets, and the guardian's shadow. Arthur looked at the map, which now seemed less a tangle of lines and more a guide, an invitation. The symbols, previously incomprehensible, began to make sense in the light of Eleanor's words. He felt a pang of guilt. How could he be so absorbed in an ancient mystery while his grandchildren were starving? But Eleanor's voice in the diary seemed to answer, "The greatest wealth is not gold, but the unwavering faith and love that binds a family. The treasure is merely a means to preserve what truly matters." The words resonated with Arthur, reminding him of Ilara's resilience, of his own inner strength that he thought he had lost. With a sigh, he closed the diary for an instant, massaging his temples. The firelight was dimming, and darkness was once again lurking in the corners of the room. He needed more firewood, and he needed to think about how to get food, but the hope the diary had ignited was food for the soul, more potent than any bread. He reopened the diary, his eyes fixed on a specific passage. The first guardian of the legacy rests where the first light of dawn touches the oldest stone. And on the map, a small circle with a sun symbol was marked near a structure he recognized as the remains of a watchtower. It was a clear clue, the first of many, he supposed. Arthur felt a shiver run down his spine, not from cold, but from an emotion that mixed excitement and apprehension. Was he truly on the threshold of a discovery that could change everything? Could he, a tired and battered old man, decipher the secrets of an entire castle? He looked at Joanne, who was now watching him with half-closed eyes. "Grandpa," the boy called, his voice weak. "I'm very hungry." Reality returned with force. Eleanor's promise was powerful, but his grandchildren's empty stomachs were an immediate urgency. Arthur tucked the diary and map back into his coat. "I know, my angel. Grandpa will find something. Tomorrow, at dawn, we will look for this oldest stone. And who knows, perhaps it will show us the way to something that can warm and feed us." He hugged Joanne tightly, his determination renewed. The journey to the treasure was also a race against time, against the hunger and cold that threatened his little ones. With every beat of his heart, Arthur promised himself he would not fail. Arthur held Joanne tightly in his arms, feeling the fragile warmth of the small body. The promise to find something, to make it work, echoed in his mind like a desperate mantra. Pedro slept deeply, oblivious to the anxiety consuming his grandfather, Arthur closed his eyes, but sleep did not come. With every crackle of wood in the fire, every gust of wind that penetrated the room's cracks, his mind revisited Eleanor's words. The map, the urgency of the hunger that gnawed at his grandchildren's stomachs. He felt like an old boat adrift. But now, perhaps, there was a star to guide his way. Dawn arrived slowly, painting the sky a pale grey that soon transformed into rosy and golden hues. The light, though cold, was a balm for Arthur's soul. He watched the castle awaken, the ruins gaining defined contours under the rising sun, shadows retreating like dissipated fears. The air was still icy, but there was a quietude, a melancholic beauty that made him think of Elara, of how she would have appreciated the resilience of that place. João awoke with a groan, his large, sleepy eyes fixed on his grandfather. "Grandpa, has the sun risen?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Pedro beside him stirred but continued to sleep. Arthur smiled, a tired but genuine smile. "Yes, my angel." And with it, hope. He helped João sit up, feeling the boy's weakness. Hunger was a constant enemy, a cruel reminder of their situation. "Come, João, we need to wake Pedro," Arthur said, his voice soft. "Remember what the diary said about the oldest stone and the first light of dawn?" João's eyes widened slightly, a spark of curiosity replacing exhaustion. He remembered his grandfather's words. Arthur gently shook Pedro, who grumbled before opening his eyes. The younger boy, seeing the daylight, blinked, still a little confused. "Hungry, Grandpa," Pedro murmured, his small hand reaching for Arthur's. The old man's heart ached. "I know, my loves, but Grandpa has a plan. We'll look for this stone, and who knows, it might guide us to something that can feed us." He stood up, his muscles protesting, and picked up the map and diary. The watchtower, marked with the sun symbol, wasn't far from where they were, but the walk would be a challenge for the hungry boys. With an arm around each grandchild, Arthur began the journey. Every step was slow, careful. João tried to be brave, but his lips were pale, and he stumbled occasionally. Pedro, lighter, was carried by Arthur when weariness overcame him. The castle, once a labyrinth of shadows, now revealed details of its ancient glory and its current decay. Moss covered the stones, and small plants sprouted from the cracks, a sign of life amidst the desolation. Finally, they reached the remains of the watchtower. It was an imposing structure, even in ruins, with one of its walls still standing, pointing east. Arthur looked at the map, then at the tower. There was a large stone at the base of the east wall, older and darker than the others, covered in lichen. It was unmistakable. "There, my children, the oldest stone!" Arthur exclaimed, a hint of excitement in his voice. The rising sun, now climbing in the sky, cast its first golden rays directly onto that stone. Arthur felt a shiver. It was as if Eleanor were there, guiding them. He knelt. The boys, watching with renewed curiosity, his wrinkled fingers traced the cold, rough surface of the stone. There was something. It wasn't a compartment, but a subtle, almost imperceptible carving, forming the design of a small flower, and below it, an arrow pointing to the ground. "A flower," Arthur murmured, his eyes welling up. It was a lily, Elara's favorite flower. Was it just a coincidence or a sign? He felt her presence there, a familiar warmth in his heart. The arrow indicated a spot on the beaten earth floor, just in front of the stone. With trembling hands, Arthur began to dig with his fingers, hope pulsing in his veins. The earth was loose, and soon his fingers touched something hard, not a stone, but a small ceramic pot. He pulled it out carefully. It was a simple pot, sealed with wax. João's and Pedro's eyes were fixed on it, hunger momentarily forgotten by anticipation. Arthur broke the seal. Inside, there was no gold or jewels, but a handful of dry seeds and a small rolled parchment. The initial disappointment was quickly replaced by understanding. Eleanor would not lead them directly to the treasure without first ensuring their survival. The seeds were for planting, for life. The parchment contained the next clue, written in the same elegant handwriting. Where water sings and earth embraces, life will flourish. The journey was just beginning, but hope, now, had roots. Arthur held the pot with the dry seeds, the small rolled parchment in his other hand, while João's and Pedro's eyes, previously full of anticipation, now reflected palpable disappointment. João tilted his head, his small shoulders slumped. "Seeds, Grandpa?" "But we can't eat seeds now," he murmured, his voice weak and laden with hunger. Pedro, more direct in his childish frustration, pouted. "I want bread." Arthur's heart ached, a familiar pain that went beyond physical exhaustion. He understood the urgency, the cruelty of the hunger consuming them, but a new understanding, a wisdom from Eleanor across time, began to dawn in his mind. Those seeds were not for now, but a promise for tomorrow, a glimpse of future sustenance. They were life. "My angels, listen," Arthur said, kneeling with difficulty to be at the boy's height, his eyes tired but now lit by a new light. He stroked João's hair, a gesture that sought to convey more than words. "Eleanor wouldn't give us seeds if there wasn't a place to plant them. This is the next part of our path, a gift from her to us." He carefully unfolded the small parchment. Eleanor's elegant handwriting, revealing the new clue, where water sings and earth embraces, life will flourish. He repeated the words slowly, savoring each one, as if trying to extract their full essence. "We need to find a place with water and good earth, my little ones, a place where we can sow hope." João looked at the parchment, then at his grandfather, a small flame of curiosity and understanding igniting in his eyes. "Water that sings, a stream, Grandpa?" Arthur smiled, a tired but genuine smile, encouraging his grandson's imagination. "Perhaps, my angel, or a spring. Let's look." Hunger still gnawed at them, a constant reminder of their vulnerability, but the new task gave them purpose, a focus that, for an instant, pulled them from despair. Arthur put away the seeds and the parchment with the same care he guarded his own grandchildren. With João by the hand and Pedro nestled in his lap, he began to explore another part of the castle. The sun was climbing in the sky, but the cold persisted, penetrating their bones. Every step was an effort, every muscle protesting. The ruins were treacherous, full of rubble and hidden holes, and Arthur needed to be doubly cautious, protecting the boys from falls. He remembered a small inner courtyard he had seen from afar, with what looked like a well or a fountain. It was an intuition, but Eleanor seemed to guide his steps. After what seemed an eternity, traversing desolate corridors and overgrown courtyards, they arrived at a small walled garden, long abandoned. In the center, a stone fountain, dry and moss-covered, stood silent, but beside it, a trickle of water flowed from a crack in the wall, forming a small puddle and a faint stream that snaked through a patch of damper, darker earth. "Water that sings," Arthur whispered, watching the stream murmur softly among the stones, "and earth that embraces." The patch of earth, though covered in weeds, seemed fertile, protected from the wind by the ancient walls. João's eyes gleamed, and he exclaimed with renewed energy, "It's here! Grandpa! It's here!" Pedro, though still hungry, pointed to the water with a small cry of joy. "Water!" Arthur gently placed Pedro on the ground and released João's hand. He knelt, feeling the damp, cold earth beneath his wrinkled fingers. It was good, soft soil, an invitation to life. With his hands, he began to remove weeds and stones, preparing the ground. It was arduous work for a man his age, with aching muscles and an empty stomach, but the image of Ilara, who had always loved gardening and the life that sprang from the earth, gave him unexpected strength. He imagined her smile, proud of his perseverance. The boys, sensing their grandfather's energy, began to help, pulling out small weeds with their tiny hands, a simple act, yet laden with deep symbolism. Arthur took out the pot of seeds. With reverent care, he scattered them on the prepared earth, gently covering them with his fingertips. "Now, my little ones," he said, his voice choked with emotion, "we need the singing water for life to flourish." João and Pedro ran to the stream, scooping water in their small hands and pouring it over the earth. Every drop was a silent prayer, every seed a promise of a future. Arthur watched them, his heart overflowing with a bittersweet emotion. It wasn't the gold they expected, but it was something more valuable. The hope of a future, the certainty that life could flourish even in the deepest desolation. The seeds were small, but they represented an immense act of faith. He knew it would take time for them to sprout, and hunger would not wait. But by planting those seeds, he was also planting resilience and faith in his grandchildren's hearts, and in his own. The sunlight, now stronger, bathed the small garden, and Arthur felt a warmth that didn't come only from the sun's rays. It was Ilara's presence, Eleanor's wisdom, and the silent strength of family love that propelled him. The next clue was yet to be revealed, but for now, that act of sowing was enough. It was life. Arthur watched the boys, his heart overflowing with a bittersweet emotion. That act of sowing was life. Yes, but life yet to come, and the hunger that gnawed at them was an immediate and cruel reality. He stood with a groan, his back protesting, and felt the emptiness in his stomach. João and Pedro, exhausted, sat on the damp earth, their eyes fixed on the small, newly planted bed, as if they could see the seeds sprouting right there. "Grandpa, when will the seeds turn into food?" Pedro asked, his voice almost inaudible, his face pale and lips cracked. João merely looked at him, hope battling disillusionment in his large eyes. Arthur felt a pang of despair, but the image of Ilara, always strong and practical, spurred him on. Eleanor would not have guided them there, only to see them wither. There was more. He knelt again, not to plant, but to observe. Eleanor's clue, "Where water sings and earth embraces, life will flourish," echoed in his mind. They had found the water and the fertile earth. But what about immediate life? He ran his fingers over the walled stone wall that protected the garden, feeling the moss and the coldness. His eyes scanned every crack, every loose stone. There was a small, almost imperceptible indentation covered by dense ivy and moss, right at the base of the wall, where the stream murmured more strongly. With an effort, Arthur began to pull away the ivy, revealing a stone that seemed out of place, a little darker and with an irregular edge. The boys, noticing the new activity, crawled closer, curiosity overcoming hunger for an instant. "What is it, Grandpa?" João whispered, his eyes wide. Arthur didn't answer, focused on his work. With his wrinkled hands, he felt the stone, sensing that it wasn't cemented like the others. With a firm push, the stone gave way, revealing a small, dark niche in the wall. A shiver ran through Arthur. It wasn't large, but it was a hidden compartment. His trembling fingers reached inside. He touched something soft, then something harder. Carefully, he pulled out a small bag of thick linen, tied with a cord, and a heavier cloth bundle. Arthur's heart pounded, an accelerated rhythm of expectation and apprehension. He untied the linen bag. Inside, there were pieces of dried meat, stale bread, and some dried fruits, apples and raisins. A sweet and salty smell filled the air. João's and Pedro's eyes widened, and a small cry of joy escaped Pedro's lips. "Food, Grandpa! Real food!" Arthur felt tears well up in his eyes. It wasn't gold, But it was far more valuable at that moment. It was the answer to his silent prayers, proof of Eleanor's generosity. He opened the cloth bundle. Inside, there were 2 soft wool blankets, carefully folded, and a small leather canteen. The blankets, though old, were in perfect condition, and the canteen, surprisingly, contained fresh, potable water. The turning point had arrived, not with a treasure of riches, but with the promise of immediate life and comfort. Arthur distributed the dried meat and bread among the boys, who began to eat with an avidity that broke the heart and filled the soul. He himself took a piece, feeling energy slowly return to his tired body. The water from the canteen was nectar. As they ate, he wrapped the boys in the warm blankets, watching their faces light up, colors returning to their pale cheeks. "Eleanor knew, my angels," Arthur murmured, his voice choked. "She knew we would need more than seeds. She gave us the hope of the future and the sustenance of the present." That small, walled garden, once a place of desolation, was now a sanctuary of life and gratitude. Hunger still existed, but despair had been replaced by unwavering faith. With his stomach a little fuller and his body warmed, Arthur felt a strength that came not only from the food, but from the certainty that they were not alone. The journey continued, but now they had the strength to move forward, one step at a time, guided by Eleanor's wisdom and the love that bound them. Arthur felt the warmth of the blankets and the satiety of the food warm their bodies and souls. Joao's and Pedro's faces, once pale, now showed a flush, their eyes shining with renewed life. Pedro dozed, stale bread in hand. Joao, the elder, looked at his grandfather with gratitude. "Thank you, Grandpa," he whispered, his voice weak, emotional. Arthur stroked his grandson's hair. "Thank Eleanor, my angel. She was wise." The seedbed was a beginning, but the treasure needed to be found. Without waking Pedro, Arthur picked up the diary and the map. The sunlight illuminated the pages. The previous clue, "Where water sings and earth embraces, life will flourish," had led them to food and seeds. A new direction was crucial. His eyes scanned Eleanor's mentions: stars that guide, waters that whisper secrets, and the guardian's shadow. The water had already spoken. The stars would be for the night. The guardian's shadow remained. Arthur searched for the symbol on the map. An almost imperceptible drawing in the upper corner near the highest tower showed a knight with a sword pointed downwards and a sun with an elongated shadow. "The guardian's shadow," Arthur murmured, his heart racing. Could this be the next clue? He looked at the highest tower, imposing in its decay. The walk would be arduous with the boys, but the hope that had been nourished was a powerful engine. "Joao, my little one," Arthur called. "Do you feel stronger?" Joao nodded. "Yes, Grandpa, I can help." Arthur smiled, proud. "Let's look for the guardian, or he will show us the next step." He explained the clue to Joao. The boy listened, his imagination soaring, transforming the search into an adventure. Arthur wrapped Pedro in the blanket and picked him up. Outside the garden, the icy wind seemed less biting, the ruins less threatening. They crossed courtyards of rubble, climbed worn stone stairs. The highest tower seemed to recede, a constant challenge. Joao, though tired, tried to keep up, exploring every corner. "Grandpa, what does a guardian guard?" Joao asked. Arthur smiled, adjusting Pedro. "He guards a secret, my angel. A secret Eleanor wanted us to find." He thought of Ilara, of her faith. His wife's love was the true guardian of his heart. Finally, after what seemed an eternity, they reached the base of the highest tower. It was a windy spot with a breathtaking view. On the ground in front of the collapsed entrance lay a large stone slab covered in moss. The sunlight, leaning towards midday, cast a long, sharp shadow of the tower onto this slab. "The Guardian's shadow," Arthur whispered, his eyes fixed on the slab. Unmistakable. He felt a shiver, the sensation of being in the right place at the right time. Eleanor's wisdom was surprising. He knelt, the boys watching. His wrinkled fingers touched the cold surface of the slab, searching for clues. There was an almost erased carving in the center of the slab, where the tower's shadow met. It was the same symbol of the knight with the sword pointed downwards from the map. Arthur felt a tremor. He was getting closer and closer. Arthur's wrinkled fingers, calloused by time and labor, traced the carving on the slab. It wasn't just a drawing, he realized, but a subtle depression, a recess that seemed to invite touch. The image of the knight, with his sword pointed downwards, had an almost imperceptible relief. He pressed, fumbled, feeling the cold, rough stone beneath his skin. There was something there, a small protrusion that didn't seem natural. With an effort that made his muscles protest, Arthur tried to turn the central part of the carving. Nothing. He pushed harder, feeling the tip of the sword. A soft click, almost inaudible, echoed in the silence of the courtyard. The stone slab, which had seemed immovable before, shifted minimally to the side, revealing a dark, narrow crevice. Arthur's eyes widened. It was a hidden compartment, larger than the previous one, yet still discreet. João, who had been watching with bated breath, let out a small cry of surprise. Pedro, who had woken with the movement and sound, blinked, his face still marked by sleep, but now alert. "What is it, Grandpa?" João asked, his voice full of renewed anticipation, forgetting his weariness for an instant. Arthur didn't answer immediately, his hand trembling slightly as he reached inside the niche. His fingers touched something soft, a fabric, and then something firmer, metallic. Carefully he pulled out a small, dark velvet pouch and then a small carved wooden box. The velvet was soft to the touch, and the box, though ancient, was in perfect condition, decorated with delicate patterns of leaves and flowers. He untied the velvet pouch first. Inside, there was no gold, but a handful of small silver coins and a simple silver ring with a dark blue stone set in it. The coins, though few, were a treasure for someone who had nothing. The ring, he recognized, was Eleanor's engagement ring, which she always wore. A tear rolled down Arthur's wrinkled face. It was a personal touch, a remembrance of his beloved, and proof that Eleanor had planned every detail with love and foresight. "Coins, Grandpa, and a ring!" João exclaimed, his eyes shining. Pedro stretched out his small hand to touch the coins, fascinated by the gleam of the silver. Arthur smiled, a melancholic smile. "Yes, my angels, to help us on our way." He put away the coins and the ring with reverence, feeling his connection with Eleanor deepen. Next, he opened the carved wooden box. Inside rested a small map, made of thin, aged parchment and a piece of charcoal. This map was different from the first. It seemed to detail a specific area of the castle, with more complex symbols. Eleanor's elegant handwriting adorned the top, where the moonlight kisses the highest stone and the wind whispers ancient secrets. There the castle's heart will reveal its true worth. Arthur felt a shiver. The moonlight. This meant the next stage of the quest could only happen at night, the wind whispering ancient secrets. He looked at the tower, then at the sky, where the sun was already beginning to set, painting the clouds orange and purple. Night was approaching, and with it, a new challenge. "The moonlight, Grandpa?" João asked, noticing the change in his grandfather's expression. "Yes, my angel. We will have to wait for night," Arthur replied, his voice laden with a mix of weariness and determination. He knew the wait would be difficult for the boys, but Eleanor's promise was too strong to be ignored. The silver coins were an immediate relief, but the true treasure was yet to be found. He stood up, his muscles aching, and picked Pedro up, while João clung to his hand. "Let's find a safe place to spend the night, my little ones, and then under the moonlight we will seek the castle's heart." His faith in Eleanor and his love for his grandchildren were the strength that propelled him step by step through the silent ruins. The journey was far from over, but each clue unraveled was a nod of hope, a reminder that perseverance and family love were the true treasures. Arthur, with Pedro asleep in his arms and João clinging to his hand, felt the weight of the approaching night. The sun had already hidden behind the distant walls, and a grey cloak began to envelop the castle, making the ruins even darker and more mysterious. The wind, which had only whispered before, now seemed to howl through the cracks in the stones, bringing with it a biting cold that promised a long, icy night. Eleanor's clue about the moonlight and the wind whispering secrets echoed in his mind, but the immediate priority was to find safe shelter for the boys. He knew that Eleanor's silver coins and ring were valuable, but they would be useless if they couldn't survive that night. Arthur pressed Pedro against him, feeling the warmth of the small body, and looked at João, who, despite his weariness, kept his curious eyes fixed on the surroundings. "Come, my little one," Arthur said, his voice hoarse. "We need to find a place to hide from the wind and the cold." They began to descend from the tower, their steps slow and careful. Every shadow seemed to lengthen and dance, transforming the familiar shapes of the ruins into imaginary monsters. João squeezed his grandfather's hand, and Arthur felt the small tremor in his fingers. "Grandpa, it's dark," João murmured, his voice trembling. "I'm scared." Arthur knelt with Pedro in his lap, pulling João into a tight embrace. "Don't worry, my angel. Grandpa is here, and Eleanor is protecting us too. Remember the blankets? They will keep us warm." He tried to infuse his voice with a calm he didn't fully feel, but his determination was genuine and unwavering. They explored the lower levels of the castle, searching for a room that offered some protection. Many were collapsed, others too open to the wind. Finally, Arthur spotted a small room, almost a cubicle, that seemed to have been a pantry or a small guard's room. It had 3 intact walls and a partial ceiling, offering a precarious refuge, but better than the open sky. The floor was covered in debris, but Arthur, with superhuman effort, began to push the larger stones aside, creating a small space for them. He unfolded the wool blankets which Eleanor had provided and spread them over the cleared floor. He placed Pedro, still asleep, in the center, and then invited João to snuggle beside his brother. Arthur sat down, leaning against the cold wall, and pulled his 2 grandchildren close, wrapping his arms around them. The warmth of the 3 together was a small comfort against the cold that penetrated the walls. Darkness deepened. In the distance, the howling wind was the only melody. Arthur took out the canteen and offered a sip to João, who drank eagerly. He himself took a small sip, feeling his throat dry. The food they had found earlier had been consumed, and hunger, though momentarily appeased, would soon become a concern again. Arthur looked at the sky through the crack in the ceiling. The moon, a thin, silvery slice, was beginning to emerge, casting a pale, ghostly glow over the ruins. "The moonlight kisses the highest stone," he whispered to himself, remembering the clue. The highest tower where they had been would be the observation point. But how to get there in the dark, with the boys, was a question that tormented him. He felt overwhelming weariness, pain in every muscle, but the image of Ilara, her smile, her strength, propelled him. He could not fail his grandchildren. They were all that remained of his family, the promise of a future. He stroked João's hair, who was already almost asleep, and kissed Pedro's forehead. "We will make it, my angels," he promised, more to himself than to them. "Eleanor has a plan, and we will follow it." The night would be long, but hope, like the small flame of a candle amidst the darkness, burned in his chest, warming him from within. He closed his eyes, but sleep did not come. His mind was occupied with the next stage, with the moonlight and the secrets the wind would whisper. The search for the treasure was not just for riches, but for dignity, security, and the chance to restart his grandchildren's lives. That was why he fought with every fiber of his being. Arthur opened his eyes in the oppressive darkness. Sleep, an unattainable luxury, refused to come. Eleanor's promise, where the moonlight kisses the highest stone, hammered in his mind. Moving with the boys through the labyrinth of ruins at night seemed madness, but waiting meant defying the clue. Hope needed fuel, action. With a heavy sigh, Arthur began to move, wrapping Pedro in the blanket and adjusting João to carry him. "João, my angel," Arthur whispered, gently rocking him. The boy blinked, his eyes heavy. "The moon calls us. We need to go see what it has to show us." João, despite his fear, nodded. With Pedro nestled in one arm and João clinging to his back, Arthur stood up. Every step was a silent prayer. The moon, now higher, peeked between the ruins, casting dancing, silvery shadows. The stone stairs, treacherous in daylight, became slippery traps in the gloom. Arthur fumbled with each step. João, frightened, remained silent, his face buried in his grandfather's shoulder, absorbing warmth and courage. Pedro continued to sleep deeply. Arthur's heart pounded with the anxiety of each uncertain step. They climbed, step after step, through collapsed corridors and courtyards open to the icy wind. Finally, Arthur recognized the imposing silhouette of the highest tower, bathed in a silvery moonlight. The stone slab, where they had found the previous clue, was illuminated by an ethereal light. "We've arrived, my angels," Arthur whispered. The moonlight kissed the highest stone, and a segment of the wall, previously hidden, glowed with an almost iridescent hue. The wind, once a howl, now whispered around that spot a melodic sound. With the boys in his arms and on his back, Arthur approached the illuminated wall. The silvery light revealed a delicate carving, almost invisible during the day, a pattern of falling stars and a crescent moon. In the center, there was a small indentation, a tiny hole. Arthur felt a shiver. He remembered the piece of charcoal Eleanor had left. He took the charcoal from his pocket and inserted it. The fit was perfect. He felt a slight resistance, and then, with a gentle turn, the charcoal moved. A low, dragging sound echoed from within the wall, a slow, deep creak. Slowly, a section of the wall, larger than the previous compartments, began to slide away, revealing a dark, damp passage. The heart of the castle was opening. Arthur felt the cold, stagnant air, but also a fresh current, smelling of earth and mystery. João, who had lifted his head, watched with wide eyes. Pedro, still sleeping, merely snuggled closer. Arthur hesitated, the fear of the unknown battling Eleanor's promise. But determination won. He had not come this far to retreat. With a firm step, he entered the dark passage, leading his grandchildren to the final revelation. The wind outside now whispered like a welcoming song. Faith and family love were the light that guided them. Arthur entered the dark passage, the cold, stagnant air enveloping him like a heavy cloak. The smell of damp earth and centuries of silence filled the space, and the darkness was almost absolute, broken only by the faint, silvery light filtering through the entrance crack. Every step was cautious, his feet feeling the uneven, damp ground. Pedro, still asleep in his arms, was a precious and vulnerable weight. João, clinging to his back, trembled slightly but remained silent, his eyes wide, absorbing every detail of that nocturnal adventure. The passage was narrow, the rough stone walls brushing against his shoulders. Arthur felt the dampness seeping from the stones, the muffled sound of his own breaths echoing in the small tunnel. He advanced, guided only by faith in Eleanor's wisdom and the unwavering hope for a future for his grandchildren. With every meter, the darkness seemed to thicken, and the feeling of being in a place untouched for centuries grew. Suddenly the passage widened. Arthur felt the air change, becoming less dense, and a faint, golden light began to project ahead. It wasn't moonlight, but a soft, constant glow. He blinked, adjusting his eyes, and then took the final step out of the tunnel, entering an underground chamber. The sight that unfolded before him took his breath away. It wasn't a large room, but the walls were made of polished stone, and in the center, on a low pedestal, rested a chest of dark wood, adorned with bronze fittings and carvings of lions and griffins. The golden light came from small cracks in the vaulted ceiling where natural crystals shimmered, reflecting the moonlight in a magical, almost supernatural way. João let out a muffled gasp, his eyes fixed on the chest. Pedro, awakened by the change of environment and the light, blinked and, seeing the glow, stretched out a curious small hand. Arthur, his heart beating erratically, carefully placed Pedro on the floor covered by a thin layer of sand, and João slid off his back, running to his grandfather's side. With trembling hands, Arthur approached the chest. The wood was ancient, but incredibly well preserved. There was no visible lock, just an intricate design of an intertwined sun and moon in the center of the lid. He touched the design, and to his surprise, the chest's lid lifted with a soft creak, revealing its contents. Inside, the golden light of the crystals danced over an unimaginable fortune. Piles of gold coins gleamed, jewels sparkled in vibrant colors, rubies red as blood, emeralds green as the forest, sapphires blue as the deepest sky. There were necklaces, rings, bracelets, all crafted with an art that had long been lost. It was more than Arthur could have dreamed of in his entire life, more than he ever thought possible. A warm tear rolled down Arthur's wrinkled face, mixing with the dirt and weariness. It wasn't just the gold and jewels that moved him, but the tangible proof of Eleanor's love and foresight. She had planned everything, every clue, every obstacle, so that they would arrive there. It was redemption, the promise of a new life, not just for him, but for his grandchildren, who now looked at the treasure with a mix of childish fascination and incomprehension. "Grandpa," João whispered, his voice full of awe. "What is all this?" Arthur knelt, pulling the two boys close. "It's our hope, my angels," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "It's Eleanor's promise. She has given us a new beginning." He felt the weight of misery dissipate, replaced by an overwhelming lightness. The cold, the hunger, the despair, all of it seemed to recede before that golden glow. He picked up a pearl necklace and held it so the light would kiss it. Eleanor knew we would need more than just food and shelter. She knew we would need dignity, a home, a future. The treasure was not just material wealth. It was the manifestation of his wife's eternal love, proof that true fortune lay in the resilience of the human spirit and the unwavering strength of family bonds. This was the climax of his desperate journey, the reward for his faith and perseverance. Arthur, kneeling before the chest, felt the weight of years of suffering dissolve in the golden glow. The tears streaming down his face were not of sadness, but of overwhelming gratitude. He hugged João and Pedro tightly, the smell of earth and mold from the castle seeming less oppressive now. "It's the end of our journey of pain, my angels," he whispered, his voice choked. "It's the beginning of everything." João, his eyes still wide, curiously touched a pile of coins. "Can we buy bread, Grandpa? Lots of bread?" Arthur chuckled, a hoarse laugh full of relief. "Yes, my little one. All the bread your heart desires, and a real home and warm clothes, and everything we need to never feel cold or hungry again." Pedro, who had nestled in his grandfather's lap, let out a small babble, pointing to a glittering ruby. Arthur picked up the stone, red as a drop of blood, and held it against the light. It was a symbol of life, of warmth, of a future that had seemed impossible until that moment. He thought of Eleanor, of her unwavering faith, of her intelligence and love that had guided every step. The true treasure was not gold, but the proof of her eternal love, the certainty that, even in absence, she continued to protect them. The first task was the most urgent: how to transport that fortune. Arthur knew they couldn't take everything at once. He needed a plan, discretion. They spent the rest of the night in the chamber, protected and warmed by the new hope. Arthur, with the boys asleep in his arms, watched the treasure, feeling the immense responsibility that came with it. It wasn't just wealth. It was the chance for justice, to reverse the misery that had been imposed upon them. At dawn, the sunlight joined the light of the crystals, revealing the chamber in all its glory. Arthur decided he would take some of the lighter jewels and coins to sell in the nearest town, enough to buy a horse, a cart, and supplies for their return. He carefully hid the rest of the treasure, marking the location precisely in his mind and on a small piece of parchment he found in the chamber so they could return later. With a small bag full of carefully selected jewels and coins, Arthur picked up Pedro and took João by the hand. Their departure from the castle was no longer a desperate escape, but a step towards a new destiny. The icy morning wind seemed less biting, the ruins less threatening. They walked with renewed purpose, the image of the chest of gold and jewels etched in their minds, but more importantly, Eleanor's promise pulsing in their hearts. They reached the dusty road that had led them to the castle. Arthur looked back at Blackwood's imposing walls. It was no longer a place of curse, but a sanctuary, a testament to love and resilience. He felt a lump in his throat, a mix of relief and a pang of longing for Eleanor. But the journey didn't end there. The true journey, that of rebuilding their lives, was just beginning. In the small village a few days' walk away, Arthur found an honest merchant who, though surprised by Arthur's jewels, didn't question their origin. With the money, he bought new, warm clothes for the boys, plentiful food, and most importantly, a sturdy horse and a cart. The sight of João and Pedro eating fresh bread and cheese, their faces clean and warmed by their new clothes, filled Arthur's heart with a joy he thought he would never feel again. They were no longer beggars, but a family with a future. Overcoming misery was just the first step. Dignity was being restored, and the human connection, which seemed lost, began to flourish again. Overcoming misery was just the first step. Dignity was being restored, and the human connection, which seemed lost, began to flourish again. The journey from the small village back to a place they could call home was slow and deliberate. Arthur, with the cart and horse, no longer sought escape, but a return to life, to normalcy. He dared not return to the lands from which they had been expelled. The pain would be too great, and the memory of injustice too bitter to be relived. Instead, guided by an instinct for renewal and Eleanor's promise, he searched for a small plot of land for sale in a neighboring valley, far from curious eyes and painful memories. He found a modest plot with a small, dilapidated house, but with fertile soil and a murmuring stream that promised life. It was a beginning, a new dawn. With Eleanor's gold, he not only bought the property, but also hired some honest and hard-working villagers to help with the reconstruction. With every wall raised, every tile laid, Arthur felt the weight of loss transform into a foundation of hope and a solid future. João and Pedro, once pale and thin, now had rosy cheeks and bright eyes, full of the curiosity and joy that childhood deserved. They ran through the fields, laughed with the carefree abandon that fate had denied them for so long, and their cries of joy were the sweetest melody to Arthur's heart. He watched his grandchildren play, feeling the fullness of a love that transcends pain and time. Eleanor had given them more than material wealth. She had given them the chance for a future, for deep roots and a sense of belonging. Arthur ensured that the boys had access to a tutor so they could learn to read and write, something he had never had the opportunity to do. Education was a treasure no one could steal, an inheritance that would protect them forever. In time, the small house transformed into a welcoming home filled with warmth and laughter. The garden flourished with vibrant colors. The vegetable patch prospered with fresh food. Arthur, though he still felt Eleanor's absence with every sunset, found peace in routine, in the unconditional love of his grandchildren, and in the certainty that he had fulfilled her promise. He never forgot Blackwood Castle, but now he saw it not as a cursed place, but as a portal to redemption, a testament to his wife's eternal love. The fortune remaining in the chest was carefully guarded, used wisely to ensure the boys' stability and security. Arthur did not flaunt his wealth. He used it to build a dignified life, to help those who, like him one day, faced difficulties. He became known in the community for his discreet generosity, his wisdom, and the serenity in his gaze. People didn't know where his fortune came from, but they saw the kindness in his actions and the transformation of his family. Years passed. João and Pedro grew, becoming strong, educated young men with kind hearts and curious minds. They never forgot the journey, the cold nights in the castle, the hunger and the fear. But more importantly, they never forgot their grandfather's unwavering love and the memory of their grandmother Eleanor, whose legacy had transformed their lives. They understood that the true treasure was not gold, but the courage, faith, and love that bound them, an inheritance worth more than any jewel. On a sunny afternoon, Arthur, now with completely white hair and wrinkles deepened by time, sat in the shade of an apple tree he himself had planted. He watched João and Pedro, now grown men, working together in the vegetable garden, their mature, strong voices echoing in the air. A serene smile lit up his face. Life had been hard, but love, hope, and resilience had prevailed. Eleanor somehow was there, in every laugh of the boys, in every flower in the garden, in every beat of his grateful heart, an ethereal presence that comforted him. Her promise had been fulfilled, and the castle, once a symbol of despair, was now the memory of a miracle. True wealth, he knew, lay in the family he had saved, in the love he had cultivated, and in the dignity he had recovered. The cycle of pain had been broken, and a new legacy of hope and family love flourished, forever illuminating the path of future generations. Years turned into decades, and the apple tree planted by Arthur grew, offering generous shade over the land that became the foundation of his new life. Arthur, now very old, but with a still vivid and serene gaze, watched his grandchildren, João and Pedro, who were now the pillars of that prosperous community. They had inherited not only material fortune, but more importantly, the invaluable values that their grandfather and grandmother Eleanor had taught them: compassion, justice, and an unwavering belief in the power of family love. João, his mind sharpened by the education Arthur had provided them, became a respected counselor in the village, always ready to mediate conflicts and find just solutions for his neighbors' problems. His gestures were calm and firm, his voice thoughtful, and his eyes, which once reflected the fear of an orphaned child, now radiated wisdom and deep empathy. He vividly remembered the cold nights in the castle, the hunger that gnawed at his stomach, and this memory spurred him to ensure that no one in his community suffered similar deprivations. He dedicated part of his time to teaching the village children, sharing the gift of reading and writing so they would have the tools to forge their own destinies free from ignorance. Pedro, in turn, found his passion and purpose in the land. With strong hands, calloused by arduous work, He transformed the valley into a granary of abundance, applying techniques he had learned from books and his grandfather's experience. His generous heart led him to share the bountiful harvests with the most needy, and his laughter, once stifled by despair, now echoed free and joyful across the fields. He built a small school and a community well, ensuring that fresh water and knowledge reached everyone without distinction. With every seed planted, Pedro felt the connection to the earth and to Eleanor's legacy, who had planted the seed of hope in their hearts. Arthur, sitting in his rocking chair on the house's porch, felt the warmth of the sun on his wrinkled face, a gentle smile on his lips. The breeze carried the smell of wet earth and the sound of his grandchildren's voices, who now had their own families, with children running and playing in the same garden he had cultivated with such care. His great-grandchildren, oblivious to the harsh journey their ancestors had faced, grew up in a world of security and love, a world that had been built upon the foundation of a treasure, yes, but primarily upon the resilience of a grandfather and the vision of a grandmother. He closed his eyes, and the image of Eleanor, young and smiling, appeared in his mind, as vivid as the day he had met her. She had promised a new beginning, and he had fulfilled his part, transforming pain into purpose, misery into dignity for all. Blackwood Castle, once a dark and feared ghost, was now a family legend, a story of courage and redemption that was told to the great-grandchildren by the fireplace, not to instill fear, but to inspire faith and the importance of never giving up. Arthur felt a deep and lasting peace. His grandchildren, his children, his great-grandchildren, all were living proof that love, the true wealth, never dies. That legacy of hope and altruism, sown in the darkness of despair, now flourished in a garden of abundance and human connection, illuminating not only the lives of his family, but of the entire community that benefited from his generosity. The cycle of pain had been broken, and a new legacy of hope and family love flourished, forever illuminating the path of future generations.